This episode of Patriots United for America with Matt and Griffin. Another chaotic week and the passing of RBG. Hypocrisy takes the front of the stage.
Back with us again, and there's nothing wrong with that. We have an exciting week to talk about, and we don't have to talk about a college kid going to college during a pandemic because he's back home now, and he's a virtual guy, as he should be. And so we're going to jump right into it. Griffin, did anything exciting happen this week in politics that we need to talk about?
Well, there's the obvious. It's right there, is it not?
I don't know. I'm scratching my brain trying to see if there's anything to talk about.
But there's a lot more. There's other things going on in the world, and I definitely think that we American politics are fun, but the rest of the world deserves some coverage too. I think we kind of, in this country in particular, we don't really talk about it.
True.
Other countries are getting back to normal. Except the UK. UK is actually going back into lockdown under Boris Johnson's new coronavirus fighting regime.
Yes, the British Trump is leading them down a very, very similar path.
I don't think it's a fair comparison. They're two different people, different people. Their methods are somewhat similar. Their presentation is similar, but behind the scenes, they're pretty different people.
IQs or lack of IQs, they that might be very similar. I think they would both score under 100 on a good IQ test, possibly.
I don't think so. I think that
I people that know Boris say that he's one of the dumbest rocks that they knew, and I have a lot of personal experience with Trump, and
oh gosh.
Well, no, just watching him, man. I mean, I feel pretty invested in his stupidity.
I will say Boris Johnson though is a good campaigner. And he's good at knowing where politics is going to go, because he could have run for leadership of the Conservative Party in 2017 and become prime minister immediately, then had to go through the whole hell that Theresa May got put through over Brexit. That could have been him, but he bided his time and played his cards correctly. I think Boris Johnson is a good politician from a purely political perspective, as in he's good at getting what he wants.
Well, he definitely plays the goofy card well, with his hair going crazy and hanging from balloons and all that stuff. So he definitely can make fun of himself to move himself forward. And
if it works, it works.
Absolutely.
He has the biggest conservative majority since, I believe, Major in 1990, which is saying something. No Thatcherite size wins like 83, but still he's not a particularly inept politician, I think. But back to the obvious news in the United States, the death of RBG, Ruth Bader Ginsburg. She was on the court for 30 years, I believe, something like that.
Yep. Yeah, very sad, very, very sad, and came as a shock. I mean, I kept seeing her going in the hospital for cancer and various things, but I didn't know that it was that close. And so when it came across, the notification rolled across on my phone, I was absolutely in shock.
Yeah. I will say this. The fact that we're discussing a court appointment, especially one at the highest level, as a political discussion, is something that's very disturbing, frankly. It's kind of been that way for a long time. Every court justice is seen as conservative or liberal, but that's really a very U.S. thing, because the court is supposed to be the non-biased arbiter of law and justice and constitutional order. But we have politicized it, and that's really unfortunate to me that this has become so political. Because you go on Twitter, and there's people who have this odd cult of personality around Nancy Pelosi, RBG, and other liberal figures, and then you have the cult on the other side, which has a cult of personality around the other side's conservative figures, and I find that understandable in the executive, but particularly in the judicial system. I find that to be disturbing because, like I said, it's supposed to be the non-biased arbiter of in this country the Constitution. It's supposed to, make judgments on the Constitution. And the impractical me is always saying, why don't we have a non-political way to appoint judges? But that's just not possible in this climate, in this country, in this order.
Well, it hasn't been either. Like
Yeah.
starting with the right-wing strategy of packing the courts.
Wasn't it the FDR who tried to pack the courts?
Yeah. Well, but at the same time, just the nuclearizing of it under the beginning of Obama, and they created the situation that we're in now, as far as not having to have 60 votes, just having to have a majority, and shrinking the application of the filibuster for their own good. And interestingly so, Mitch McConnell said, "You will regret this. You will regret this, and this will come back to haunt you." And sure enough, it is. And it's him standing there. So I find that very ironic that he says that then, and then he's here to deliver the hammer. And you know what? I'm not a McConnell fan, but I did see him at
hard to like guy, if I'm honest.
Yeah. But I did see him at a conference, and he was he had a scotch in one hand and a microphone. He was at a lectern, and somebody, so it was kind of casual, I guess. But again, it looked like he was up in front of people, but he was fielding questions, and somebody said, what happens now? And this was like literally like a couple of weeks ago. What happens if there becomes a vacancy on the court? And I mean, he didn't miss a beat, and he said, well, we would fill it. And the way he was so direct and so quick about it, I mean, it literally made me laugh. And it's horrific. And I, news for our listeners. There's some politicians that are they're hypocrites. I mean, this is a shock. This is a shock.
Truly brand new news.
Here. Yeah. right. Yeah. But the level of hypocrisy, I think, is pretty shocking. You could have played it at least a little more laid back, but and McConnell, I expected out of McConnell, but Lindsey Graham, I mean, he had been like, stop the tape, and you can take
use
that
it against
to
me.
The bank.
You can use it against me. I think he said that.
He did, and turns out you can't really use it against him because he's doing it anyway. And but it'll be interesting. He's in a tight race in South Carolina. So I'm hoping, this might be the last that we have to deal with him. But, it goes back to we'll see. It's close. McConnell's isn't even close, and they're pouring money down that hole. That's just that's a waste of Democratic money. It really is, because you're just pouring it in a hole, and it's just not going to happen. I mean, that's one of the problems I've had with the Democratic Party, for decades, is you got to pick your battles and go win those battles. And like any money you spend on the southern states is just wasted money.
I don't think that's necessarily true. I think Kentucky, if I'm mistaken, does have a Democratic governor.
They do.
Bashir, I think.
But as far as presidential or against McConnell, I mean, it would be amazing if they got Lindsey Graham out, and we'll see. It's going to be an exciting time. I thought in 16, I thought I'm not sure that Trump will win a state. And then I saw,
that must have been an unpleasant night for you. That must have been
you know what? I got to go to bed early because I saw what was happening, and I didn't have to wait for the West. And I live in a house with some very strong-minded women, and they were horrified by what was going on, but they couldn't admit it. And I went ahead and literally went to sleep. And they stayed up half the night to get the same news that I already saw. And then I woke up the next morning to the situation that we're in as a country. But again, you know what? Like the debate has come up a lot this week, and we'll put the court thing to bed in a second. But I'd like to talk about this a little bit, though. And we've talked about it in the past that, the vilification of Trump, right? And Trump's got a lot of issues. And the Woodward book, I think, is newsworthy. In a normal week, in a non-RBG week, the Woodward book would be just like pretty big news, right? And I'm not sure if you've read it, but Trump came off, I think, pretty good in it for a guy that hates Trump. I was shocked how he came off on some of the stuff, and so some of the things that came out really quick were that he knew how bad it was, the coronavirus, and he was minimizing it so people didn't panic or whatever. But man, there's a lot of other things in that book that are newsworthy and that people should be talking about that they're not talking about. And but it goes back to our discussion that we've had on the show multiple times: is Trump the worst president of all time? And in my lifetime, let's just say since Nixon, he's not in the worst three.
Exactly.
Yeah, I mean, he's a buffoon. There's a lot of things wrong with him. I think putting people at the head of all the agencies that have contempt for those agencies, I don't like that strategy, and I hold that against them. And not being able to fill half the positions in a cabinet or the international assignments or anything, and alienating our allies. There's just a lot of bad things that you can say. But when you look at this book and you read the book, you come away from it and you don't think he's evil. You think he's a rich twit, and he's doing what he can do. And he's about as effective as a rich twit. And Jared actually came off better, not an evil guy, just another rich twit. And just because you're rich doesn't mean you're effective. And I think these guys are case studies in being rich and not being effective. But there's a lot of things in these books, in the book, that I thought were pretty interesting.
Back to Trump alienating America's allies, I really think that's exaggerated. I think that, only thing that we see now is just more honest diplomacy, because people are not hiding their contempt. It's more open now, and it's more, I find one of the refreshing things about Trump is that his foreign policy is relatively honest compared to previous American administrations, which is not saying much. But, Obama had this veneer of the peacemaking president. Meanwhile, the drone strikes continue, the Libyan intervention, the Syrian
Absolutely.
intervention, so on. And Trump's foreign policy is in that way an improvement. Now, domestically, we can have a discussion. Did you hear about Trump's healthcare plan that he's been supposedly trying to show to the people? I really think the most brilliant thing Trump could do if he really wanted to win this election is outflank Joe Biden from the left. If Trump came out today with a policy of universal healthcare, something like Obamacare, but much, much, much better, I think that would get him the votes he wants. I think that would win the election. Because I think what you're seeing is people who aren't really falling into the culture war that we see in our country, but people who want economic progress, healthcare, actual substantial things, right? And if he came out with that, I think he would stand a much better chance of winning. Now, he won't, because the Republican Party is obviously, just like the Democratic Party, super tied in with, big pharma and all kinds of other lobby groups. But I really think that if he runs a, like 2016, a populist campaign, I think he would still win. And I think that's where his power is. And the campaign that he has currently been running, I don't think is using populism. I don't know what it's using. It's kind of hard to pin down what it is, but as is the Biden campaign. They're both very crushingly mediocre campaigns to me. Neither one of them motivate me, make me want to go into research in their ideology or research what they want to do. Both are just so mundane to me. And that's kind of the opposite of what you should be doing in a time like this, I would think.
I mean, I agree. I mean, and the problem is, it is Biden, right? Like, Biden he's not great either. And we've said it before. It's, it's the lesser of evils that everybody knows. And this time that you're fighting more evil or whatever. But Biden's record is horrific. I mean, if you look at it, whether it's on anything, on healthcare,
or on drugs, racial issues, so many issues.
Oh my God!
I mean, it's horrible on.
Absolutely, and so I mean, that's what we're getting, right? I mean, I guess Camilla could drag him into somewhere, but once she was a prosecutor,
she's not much better.
I mean,
And then,
not in my eyes, right? Like
Mhm.
in my eyes, if you really wanted reform, and not defunding the police, again, that's the dumbest
right,
phrase in history, but police reform and the demilitarization of police
sure,
departments, I'm not sure either one of them is going to be great at that, or is going to be good to help facilitate that. And then that's down at the state and local level anyway. So I'm not sure what you're going to do about it at the national level. It's just one of those dog whistles, right, to get
right,
everybody all excited. But you're right, it's mediocre and mediocre. And if he did do a real health thing, because he is doing some stuff in the background,
right.
he apparently has got the price of insulin down to something that's legitimate, because I'm not sure if you
That's
knew, but it was getting
yeah,
to the point where people couldn't afford their insulin. That's a
right for
real
year,
thing, right?
right for
That's a
millions of
that's
people.
that's a real thing that will affect people's lives, and it's
Yeah,
not BS on a television show or whatever. It's a
right,
real thing, and it can have effects immediately, right? And
right,
and supposedly he's pursuing Americans will not pay more for a pill than anybody else in the world. If he did that, there's a tremendous amount of people that would affect, like the
right,
day after the law went through, right?
right, exactly.
Good stuff, would be great to see. And I think you're right. Like if he did come out with Medicare for all, it would have a huge price tag.
Sure, sure.
But then you would say, you know what, we're going to attack the pricing side of the equation, and we're not letting the insurance companies run wild. And you have a great example of the insurance companies running wild with the charges that are being charged back for coronavirus testing. I
Yeah,
mean, it's
yeah.
just absolutely ridiculous what's going on there,
Thousands upon thousands of dollars. It's insanity.
that we're paying for, right?
Right, right.
Whether it's tax dollars or crazy dollars going to the insurance company or whatever it is, it's just a
Right.
bogus system, and it's just screwing the people over, right? Like, everybody here says we have such great healthcare, and
We
I
do.
think,
We have good doctors, we have good people, but the problem's the price.
well, and the care is getting less and less and less with the insurance. It's getting more expensive,
Right,
and more expensive. And so you have a system where you're not really covered for anything, and the cost is more per capita than anybody in the world. And that's a
right.
serious issue, right? And
Yeah,
if
for
he,
sure.
attacked that front and center, hell, I mean, I hate Trump, and I hate everything about Trump. And if he came out and said, we're killing Obamacare, and we're going to have Medicare for all, and we're going to worry about the debt piece, secondary, because he's the king of debt, and we'll go chase the prices for my next 4 years or whatever. I mean, that's something that Jared could potentially do, right? Like, go chase pricing on medical stuff. There's things that I think he could do. Peace in the Middle East? No, I don't think so. Solving some of these serious supply problems with the coronavirus, even though one of the things that Jared Rich Boy 666 Realtor accomplished, and it covered in the book, was what they did with ventilators. And I
Right,
was very impressed with what they did with ventilators. New York said we need like 7 million ventilators, and what they did was they stockpiled ventilators in a central place, and they called everybody and said specifically, how many do you need this week? How many do you need this week? And they never ran out. And even though it turned out that ventilators were not the right thing for this virus, and it's not a respiratory illness, it's a blood issue, these guys actually had a very smart approach to making sure that ventilators were there.
available.
And again, they have, like the insulin thing. If I was a Trump advisor, I would not be pumping Law and Order and beating all this stuff. I would be pointing to, look what I just did on insulin. Look what I'm about to do on pharmaceuticals. Look what,
Right,
talking about things that I've actually done, and tangible things that affect people's lives,
right.
not walls. And I tell you, one of the weirdest stats, and we're all going broke buying it, and it was started under Obama, but one of the weirdest stats is that poverty was at an all-time low, or at least a modern history low, right before the pandemic hit. And nobody's talking about that.
Right.
And so some of the things that Trump was doing, a lot of it started on a ramp under Obama, and Trump just continued the ramp, right? The jobs ramp, it didn't,
Right.
it kept the same slope, right? The
Right.
same slope and rise that graph did. And so did the elimination of poverty. And it was because of our quantitative easing and our debt spending and all that stuff. We were purchasing all that. But there's something to be said, and you don't hear about it. It's not
Right.
on CNN. It's not anywhere. To my knowledge, I don't even think it's on Fox. I don't watch that crap, but I don't think they're talking about what he's done for insulin. I don't think
Sure.
that they're really ramming home that poverty was at an all-time low. One of the things
Mhm.
that came across in the book was, you're not very popular with Black people, and why do you think that is, and this and that. And he said it's a PR thing, and he said, I don't really care if I'm popular or not. I'm actually doing things to improve their lives. And when you look at that poverty stat and some of the things that are happening, even though it's kind of a scam and we're all purchasing it or whatever, it kind of shows the lack of real PR and the lack of a real machine that these guys have to try to promote something positive. I mean, they just really can't. All they can do is try to drag everybody through the mud and have, military, taking over Portland or whatever. It's ridiculous. It's not
And
the right way.
The ironic part about this is the party of the so-called left uses its corporate machine to keep itself in power. Like the Democratic Party is so tied with, like, MSNBC just spouts their line. It's the same thing as Fox News to the Republican Party, but they talk about issues that are also non-issues. They've Rachel Maddow has been after the Russia thing for 5 years at this point.
You can't watch that stuff. I mean,
I can't
watch it.
I can't.
Because it's ridiculous. It's one step short of QAnon on the right? Like if you got Q, Fox isn't as far out there to the right as Q is, right?
Yeah,
so Q is all the way out there, total
Right.
BS. And then I would walk it back a little bit and I'd put Fox there. But when you jump on the other side, Rachel Maddow is just as far left, somewhere out there between Fox and Q, where they are on the right side of the spectrum. It's just crap, though. It's just.
I don't think it's far left, because far left and first it's economic. I don't think it's economic. I don't think she's a big advocate of socialized policies, like social democratic policies, like in Europe. That's not her thing. Her thing is just, I don't know, vitriol. Her thing is just hating the other side. It's not.
Yeah, it's I hate Trump channel, right?
Right. It's not even a, like, we have left-wing values, or we believe in socialized ideas and medicine and all these kind of, like, there's no platform to it. That's what gets me. If there was, like, news that has, news has going to have editorial. That's going to be a thing. We can't deny our own personal biases. We can't deny the biases of journalists. It's going to happen. As unfortunate as that is. And we can try to look towards trying to find sources that are reliable, sources that are as non-biased as possible. However, things like the New York Times are going to have opinion articles, and that's not a bad thing, But we have this, like, media polarization in our heads. But then again, it's not really ideological polarization. It's like a social polarization. It's not like one is super free market and one is, basically Marx. They're both economically rather similar. Their ideologies on the economic spectrum are very, very close to each other. And that irks me, because I want to have an actual policy discussion on economics. I want us to have that conversation, because we don't. We don't talk about what, quantitative easing. We don't talk about Keynesian economics versus, Friedman's economics. We don't talk about how macroeconomics affects the individual and how families feel, things like Trump's insulin plan, things like, the hopefully, if he gets done something on prescription drugs. We don't talk about these things. We talk about these non-issues, essentially, or smaller issues in the big picture.
I mean, there's a lot of people out there, and like I said, I'm not a Trump fan, and
Right.
I'm not a fan of anybody that is claiming that we're having the best economy of all time, and we're
no one
running.
Does anyone claim that now?
Well, he did.
Okay.
That before the pandemic, it was the best economy of all time, and I'm like, well, how do we have deficit spending then? How is that possible? And because we're buying it.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, we're all buying it and we're all purchasing it. And what is it if we're not doing that? And but now, now that we're cooking so much debt
Mhm.
under COVID and then not doing the right things to help us get back to normal as quick as possible,
Right.
it makes those days even look better. It's crazy, right? But go ahead.
Things like GDP matter and are important. Like the big
Absolutely.
macro picture matter. But I think things like home ownership rates. We start talking about things like that: home ownership rate, consumer debt rate, things like student debt. Trust me, I know. Um, we start having
Right.
conversations about big economic issues in this country that we just seem to avoid. We don't talk about how that there's way more renters than there were in the past. We don't talk about how there's lots of underemployed people. We don't talk about wages. Wages haven't really gone up in real terms since like the 1970s to 1980s. We have adjusted for inflation, of course, very similar wages at that time. And we're not even talking about, you know, these massive issues. And also, minimum wage. That's not even an issue anymore. We're not talking about it. What happened to 15 or strike? People who are moving towards economic issues. And I was hoping, a part of me was hoping that during COVID, with this economic depression staring us in the face, right, that we were going to at least start talking about economic issues again. But we seem to have avoided it with this culture war, right?
Absolutely.
And that's kind of the thing that really, really gets to me every day. It's like, so many issues that we have could be at least helped a lot or solved if we started to address or microeconomic issues, but we just seem not to be willing to. And then when people do address them, they get called class reductionists. They get called populists. They get called these titles by people who are, centrist liberals who don't like having their status quo challenged.
Well, I
You
mean,
know?
if you look at what's going on and with the deficit and with deficit spending,
Yeah.
it's all in protection of corporations from
Right.
a standpoint that it's allow those profits to be as high as humanly possible, get that
Right.
taxation down as low as humanly possible,
Right.
just obliterate the middle class, get wages down as low, protect low wages as much as humanly possible. And
Right.
it's unsustainable, right?
Correct.
It's an
Absolutely correct.
absolutely unsustainable situation. And this brings us back to the court, right? The Supreme Court. So we're running into problems with all these stacked courts. And it really doesn't matter which side's stacking it, but you're
Right.
getting to the point where you're getting away from, it's for the people, and it's
Mhm.
more about this. There was a reason that Marx said that if you have a two-party system, that it's going to only appear like it's two parties, and they're really colluding to get nothing done.
Right.
And that we are a prime example of that in this country,
Exactly.
and hence the Patriots United thing that we're doing, trying to get people back to the center, where if you just get some people in the center talking about rebuilding the middle class and getting wages to where they should be, and
Right.
not worrying about stacking a court with a bunch of conservative judges that are going to protect the corporations even more than they're being protected now. I can't imagine protecting corporations more than they are now. I mean, I can't even imagine it, right? Like,
Well, but even
I guess.
a liberal justice would protect corporations. We saw that with RPG herself. She had
Absolutely.
a very pro corporate voting record, and that's the left. That's the left of America. Are people who are in bed with the same corporations as the
and
so-called
and it
right is.
and it shouldn't be just about like beating up corporations, right? But it shouldn't be corporations over people.
Right.
And that's
Exactly.
where we're at, right? We're at a protect the corporations at all costs.
Right.
And you know what, you pay $100 for a designer t-shirt that was 22 cents in China. We talk about this all the time.
Right.
And your profit margin is 98%. That's
Right.
not serving anybody. It's not serving the Chinese worker. It's not serving the American
Well,
worker. It's not serving
right.
anybody.
It's
And we
not
got,
China, it's Bangladesh today. China makes big things now. That
well,
they're
that's true, right? That's true.
now it's moving to India, Bangladesh, Vietnam, other places that are going through the sweatshop stage of development.
Absolutely.
When I was a kid, 15 years ago, yeah, everything was made in China. Every little toy I got was made in China. But now you see, now it's Bangladesh, now it's India, and I think that's, a part of China becoming its own, proper big economy that's no longer dependent on exporting things. Well, it's dependent on export, but not exporting small things, big things, or technology, higher skill um, factories in China. Now we have those low skill labor going to other countries, and that's kind of an inevitable part of globalization. And I agree, it doesn't benefit anyone, but I don't think we can go back to the time where you made jeans in North Carolina. I think, as good as
I
that
do.
sounds, you do.
I do. I absolutely do. I think you can make t-shirts here. You can make jeans here. You can make cell phones here.
Yeah,
You can make
okay.
a lot of things here. Not all of them, but the second that you say that corporate profits don't have to be 90%, and that it's going to, it's really not even going to the shareholders, right? It's going to executives and bonuses and a very small amount of people or whatever. But the second that you get away from that 30% is a good margin for a business. 40% is a good margin for a business. There's a reason that Apple is as big as it is, because of the margins that they're able to get on these devices that they're selling. And
My sister bought a $3,000 laptop from Apple.
Absolutely.
That's insane to me.
Well, and the laptops, they have some components in there that are a little more, but at the same time, not 3,000. But the second that you say that the margins don't have to be that, and that my valuation doesn't have to be $1 trillion, and it's very non-free market capitalism, right? But we don't have free market capitalism anyway. And once you say that there's no such thing, and that we're not even close to it now, it should allow you to walk it back and prioritize. It goes back to guys like the behavioral economists like Kahneman or Nasser Taleb, like all those guys. I think those are the real geniuses of this time. And they're not in politics, and nobody reads them and nobody listens to them that's in politics. But it's about gaming the system, right? And you game the system for what you want. And if you want a great middle class, you got to game the system to get a great middle class. And we got to get that. And RBG wasn't, sorry about that. RBG wasn't helping us do it. And, I don't know, whoever replaces her is
probably won't either.
Yeah, they're not going to help us do it either.
Right.
Well, that was, that was my reminder for starting to wrap this thing up. So any final thoughts there, buddy?
One more thing. Tonight's going to be interesting in Louisville, Kentucky, with the grand jury ruling on Breonna Taylor's case.
Well, they charged him.
They charged one of them with something relatively minor. I will just keep an eye on that. I would keep an eye on that if I were you, and I'd keep an eye on that if anyone else hears this tonight. I'd keep an eye on what goes on in Louisville, Kentucky tonight.
Yeah, I am. I saw it. It looked like the town was ready for a hurricane.
It does.
Everything was boarded up and it looked bad. And, I hope that they don't burn it to the ground, even though they might deserve to have it burned to the ground. I would hope that they attacked it from a much more positive and get this thing done in a positive way, right? Like, the lunatics, like you look at like the Sin Snacks Brigade that was out in Oregon, the Bundy crowd and all those guys.
Oh, yes.
There's a way to do things and not be so negative about it and still affect change. And it's at a slower rate than just voting and stuff, but it's through peaceful protest and not getting people shot and not burning down cities and just all this stuff. And I'm hoping, if they fill the streets with 1 million people and they don't burn the city to the ground, if we are not getting the results that we need out of Louisville, that will be a good. They don't burn it to the ground. But I did see where they were charging the first guy, and I thought, okay, maybe we're gonna get something here. So, but you're right, there's more to come.
Yeah, it's gonna be interesting to watch. That I can tell you for sure.
Well, I think we had a good episode this week. Everybody, thank you very much for listening, and we'll talk at you soon. And again, I think the ladies are up next, and we'll see how that goes.
Thanks.
Thanks, Griffin. Thanks, guys.